John, I'll just grab off the stand. That's all right. Okay, then we can do that. Sweet. Good morning, everyone. I might be a bit of a fresh face around here because I'm pretty seldom here, but I'm Rebecca's son, Jonty, and you might have to bear with me this morning. You might have to bear with me this morning because I got home from work at 5. So, yeah. Right. Where's the script? No, I'm not reading that. There's no way. After this, he went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax collection station, and he said to him, "Follow me." He got up, left everything, and followed him. Then Levi gave a great banquet for him in his house, and there was a large crowd of tax collectors and others reclining at the table with them. The Pharisees and their scribes were complaining to his disciples, saying, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus answered them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." Then they said to him, "John's disciples, like the disciples of the Pharisees, frequently fast and pray, but your disciples eat and drink." Jesus said to them, "You cannot make wedding attendants fast while the bridegroom is with them, can you? The days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast in those days." He also told them a parable. "No one tears a piece from a new garment and sews it onto an old garment. Otherwise, not only will one tear the new garment, but the piece from the new will not match the old garment. Similarly, no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins and will spill out, and the new skins will be ruined. But new wine must be put into fresh wineskins, and no one after drinking old wine desires new wine, but says, 'The old wine is good.'" Over to you, Mum.
Manawatia Matariki, i te whānau, i ngā kai whakatangitangi, i Emily mā, Emily kei hea koe. Oh, kia ora Emily, tēnā kōrua, ngā kai whakatangitangi, i ngā kai karakia, a Bob rawa ko Dale, tēnā kōrua. I ngā kaiarahi a Hayden rawa ko Josiah. Tēnā kōrua, Hayden, Josiah. Kia ora, Josiah. I ngā e te kai pānui a Jonty. Tēnā koe. Tēnā koutou e ho mā kua hui mai nei ki tēnei whare. Ka nui te aroha kia koutou, mō tō koutou manawa nui, ki te hui hui nei ki te ako i ihu karaiti. No Norway, no Ingarangi o Kutupuna, e noho ana au ki Orua Mōkai ki te raki pai whenua, ko Matt, taku tāne, ko Jonty, te matamua. Kei o tākou whakaihu waka, ngā teina o Jonty. He kaimahi au ki te whānau, tupunga tahi o Aotearoa, ko Rebecca Hawkins, tōku ingoa, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Morning everyone, my name is Rebecca Hawkins. Thank you very much to Emily and your team of musicians for leading us this morning, and thank you for Hayden and Josiah for your leadership as well. Thank you Bob and Dale for praying. And for Jonty, for the great reading for me, thank you. Thank you all for being here today to learn more about Jesus. I love that you are here. My ancestors came from Norway and England. I work for Place Centre Aotearoa as a centre advisor, and I'm married to Matt, who many of you will know. We live in Beach Haven on the North Shore. And we have 4 sons, so Jonty is our eldest, and the other 3 are studying at Otago University, and they are probably going to be watching online at some stage, so tēnā koutou. Now, as you may have heard in the news earlier this year, the Wellsford Fire Brigade have been fundraising for a new 4x4 operational support vehicle. And in March, they received a generous $2,500 donation from the Headhunters motorcycle gang. The brigade thanked the Headhunters for their support on their Facebook page, and this is where things started to go wrong for them. A lot of people were not happy with the brigade accepting this money, even though it was raised through a legitimate fundraiser. Internal Affairs Minister Brooke Van Velden got involved, and she said that she did not support volunteer fire brigades accepting donations from parties associated with criminal gangs, calling them a scourge on our communities. Now, as of the 23rd of March, which is the last reference I could find, the brigade was planning on returning the money, so I assume they did. Who we associate with is a big deal, right? Now, an important context of our passage today is that Jesus is hanging out with a bunch of tax collectors. I wonder if we have any tax collectors here today. We do! Ah, would you stand up, please, sir? Anybody else? Now, if you look at this guy, he looks, pretty decent and upright. I can tell you, I have actually had dinner with him, and it was great. And I'm sure none of you would have any qualms about having dinner with him. Thank you very much. So, this is not the kind of tax collectors that Jesus was talking about here. And so that's why I am challenging us to think maybe about gang members. We're talking about the Galilee Inland Revenue, who interestingly had a very similar logo. So we see there Cyril of Alexandria, who was writing in the 5th century, he said that these tax collectors were greedy for dirty money, filled with an uncontrolled desire to possess, careless of justice in their eagerness to have what did not belong to them. And then in the 20th century, Ralph Earl wrote, as a class, the tax collectors were hated by their fellow Jews. This was almost inevitable. They represented the foreign domination of Rome. Their methods were necessarily inquisitorial. That they often overcharged people and pocketed the surplus is almost certain. In the Gospels, in the rabbinical writings, they're classified with robbers. In the Synoptic Gospels, they are bracketed with sinners. This shows the common attitude of the Jewish people toward them. They were considered to be renegades who sold their services to the foreign oppressor to make money at the expense of their own countrymen. They were not very nice people. And Jesus actually criticized people in his day by comparing them to tax collectors. In one of his most stinging attacks in Matthew chapter 21, he told the religious leaders, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you. So imagine Jesus saying this to Hayden. Like, you know what, Hayden? The headhunters and the mongrel mob are going to get into the kingdom of heaven ahead of you. Let me just say, quickly, I don't think Jesus would actually say that to Hayden. But I want us to understand how really shocking this statement was. And how really shocking it was that Jesus chose to associate with these people and to socialize with them. And so, unsurprisingly, the religious leaders have some concerns. And once again, Jesus' answer is pretty shocking. Guess what, guys? I'm actually not here to impress you. And I don't care what you think of me. You guys who think you have it all figured out, who are so convinced of your own righteousness, who look down on others, you're not going to get me. And I'm not going to waste my time. Imagine if Jesus said that to you. How would you respond? In this case, they came back with another question, and here is where today's passage begins. So the host of the party, Levi, he's also known as Matthew, and he wrote his own account of this in the book of Matthew. And in this writing, he tells us that it was the followers of John the Baptist who asked this next question. What is Jesus doing, eating and drinking and partying anyway? This is not how a godly person should behave, right? You're not meant to be having fun. The Pharisees, the religious conservatives of the day, fasted twice a week. And perhaps John's followers did the same. We know that John himself lived in the desert on a diet of locusts and wild honey, which I guess is kind of like those cricket grasshopper chip things you can get now from the supermarket. And again, Jesus replied, "You guys really have no idea who I am and what I'm doing here, do you? Look, wedding guests cannot mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them, can they?" So imagine going to a wedding and dressing all in black and having a miserable expression on your face, refusing the food and drink, refusing to toast the bride and groom, sitting in a corner by yourself while everyone else is dancing. Who would do that? Jesus is telling his contemporaries that he is the bridegroom and he is here now. So it's time to celebrate. Oh. In the Hebrew Bible, which is our Old Testament, we see quite a lot of fasting. There are two primary reasons for fasting. The first is in response to a great loss, such as the death of a king. The second reason is as an expression of hope. Our situation is dire. We can see no way out, but we hope in God. An example of this is Daniel's fast for God to free his people from their captivity in Babylon. And these are also reasons why we might fast today. In the Hebrew Bible, God only mandates one day a year for fasting, which is the Day of Atonement. And this is an extremely solemn day when God's people admit the things they have done wrong and ask for forgiveness. They ask for a fresh start with God. Their fasting is an expression of hope. But Jesus tells his listeners here, don't you understand? I am the hope you've been waiting for. I'm here. You can stop waiting now. These are good times. Your prayers have been answered. Let's party. Jesus had been trying to get them to see this for a while. You might remember back in the first message in this series, way back in February, that Jesus was going around telling people that he had come to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, and to let the oppressed go free. He was telling them that he was the anointed one that the prophet Isaiah had predicted around 800 years earlier. Then he went and showed them that he meant it. He was driving out demons from people possessed. He was healing sick people, including those with the dreaded disease of leprosy. He was enabling paralyzed people to walk again. He was even pronouncing God's forgiveness for people who'd been living in destructive ways. But not everyone was convinced, particularly the religious leaders. They had some issues with Jesus, like, yeah, I can see he's doing some good stuff, but then again, do you know where he's from? Australia. It was actually Galilee, but I'm just putting it into our context. Do you really think God's chosen one would come from Australia? Who would ever think that? And I've heard his family's a bit dodgy. And he's not that good at following the rules. If he was really from God, he wouldn't be healing people on a Sunday, would he? That's just for going to church, not for helping people. And what about all those parties with the headhunters? Doesn't he know who they are? Doesn't he know who we are? He can't be the one. They didn't like what he was saying, and they found lots of reasons not to listen. Even Jesus' mate John the Baptist was unsure. In chapter 7 of this book, he sends some of his followers to have a quiet word with Jesus. Hey buddy, are you the one we've been looking for, or should we be waiting for someone else? Jesus just wasn't what they expected. So then we get to the new and old stuff. New cloth, new wine, old wine, new wineskins, old wineskins. Most commentators agree that Jesus is referring to the new covenant here. This is what the prophet Jeremiah talked about 600 years before Jesus. And in the Message paraphrase of the Bible, it says this. So it's quite small. I'll read it to you. Heads up. The days are coming when I'll set up a new plan for dealing with Israel and Judah. I'll throw out the old plan I set up with their ancestors when I led them by the hand out of Egypt. They didn't keep their part of the bargain, so I looked away and let it go. This new plan I'm making with Israel isn't going to be written on paper, isn't going to be chiseled into stone. This time, I'm writing out my plan in them, carving it on the lining of their hearts. I'll be their God, they'll be my people. They won't go to school to learn about me or buy a book called God in 5 Easy Lessons. They'll all get to know me firsthand, the little and the big, the small and the great. They'll get to know me by being kindly forgiven, with the slate of their sins forever wiped clean. Jesus was doing something new for these people, and it wasn't what they anticipated. He was turning everything upside down. He proclaimed that the first would be last and the last would be first. He told people that the way up was down, that he was interested in the humble people, that those who really wanted to find life needed to let it go. He told them that his kingdom belonged to the poor people, to the hungry, to the grief-stricken, to the marginalized, and that those who were rich, comfortable, and respected were in trouble. You can imagine that this did not sound like great news to the people who were rich, comfortable, and respected. And I'm afraid to say, as most of us here are also rich, comfortable, and respected, we are likely to struggle with Jesus' teachings a bit as well. You don't put new wine into old wineskins because new wine is still fermenting and is expensive. It needs room to grow. It's like freezing liquid. It's going to expand. So if you've filled your container too much, it's going to burst the lid off or break it. Old wineskins are hardened. They aren't going to stretch with the new wine, so they will burst and the wine will be lost. Sadly, people set in the old ways could not handle Jesus' message. New wine must be put into fresh wineskins. And here's the sucker punch from Jesus, verse 39. No one, after drinking old wine, desires the new wine, but says the old is good. Ba-boom. And this is bad news for people like me who are quite comfortable in the church and in the world today. You know, I'm actually generally happy with the world as it is. it works for me, and I'm not really that keen for change, to be honest. In 2020, I attended some professional development on Māori maternal mental health. What an eye-opener. The message that kept being repeated was that the current health system does not work for Māori. I was honestly bamboozled. What were they talking about? The system worked fine for me. Then I started listening to their stories, and I started to understand a bit. Had I not attended this event, I would probably still be oblivious to the problem because it works fine for me. Why should it change? Philip Yancey wrote a book called What Good is God, which I highly recommend, and in it he recalls asking an Eastern European prostitute why she thought Jesus had said that tax collectors and prostitutes were going into the kingdom of heaven ahead of the religious elite. And this is her response. She said, everyone, she has someone to look down on, not us. We are at the lowest. Families, they feel shame of us. No mother nowhere looks at her little girl and says, honey, when you grow up, I want you to be a good prostitute. Most places, we are breaking the law. Believe me, we know how people feel about us. People call us names, whore, slut, hooker, harlot. We feel it too. We're the bottom, and sometimes when you are at the low, you cry for help. So when Jesus comes, we respond. Maybe Jesus meant that. On the other hand, Dallas Willard, the renowned Christian philosopher, said in a 1993 interview, so much of what goes on in the church and in organised religion is nothing more than a systematic attempt to protect our way of living against the wild claims of Jesus on us. Tragically, religious conservatives have often been concerned with protecting the status quo and have missed the radical message of Jesus and ended up on the wrong side of history. Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann cites the example of much of the church in Nazi Germany. He said the assumption was that the main function of the Christian faith and the church was to legitimate the regime, and behind that is enormous anxiety about the collapse of old certitudes. And it is natural for us to be afraid of change. And Catholic priest Richard Rohr gives us this warning. The best and most convincing disguise for fear is seeming virtue or godliness. Then it never looks like fear. It looks like reason, prudence, common sense, intelligence, the need for social order, morality, religion, obedience, justice, or even spirituality. Now, there is an alternative interpretation of the old new thing that I thought I should mention because I had a very long discussion about this with my husband, who pointed out that old wine actually is better than new wine. And Joel B. Green from Fuller Seminary also makes this point in his commentary on Luke, and so he reverses everything that I've said. He says that the stuff that Jesus was talking about was actually the old stuff that God had intended all along, and the stuff that the religious leaders were teaching was actually new stuff that had been developed through the years through their own traditions. But whatever, it doesn't really matter because whether Jesus' message was old or new, the point is it was different. The two were not compatible. So what to do? Can I beg you to look again at Jesus. When Dallas Willard was asked by a pastor for book recommendations, he replied thoughtfully, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That is the 4 New Testament accounts of Jesus' life. I think the pastor was probably hoping for something more. Many of us have a problem here. I have a problem here because I have been reading these books for 45 years. So they are so familiar that I can often skim through them without really thinking about what I'm reading. And I've heard so many sermons about Jesus that really, what more could I possibly learn? Surely I know it all, just like the Pharisees. But you know what? I don't know it all. And I can give you a recent example that really shocked me. So who can tell me what was Jesus' occupation before he went into ministry? Someone said over here? Sally, carpenter. Thank you very much. Jesus was a carpenter, right? Now, does everyone agree, or does anyone have any other ideas? Yes? A stone worker? I haven't heard that one. Thank you. Over here? Yep. Yeah. That is very interesting. Thank you. See, I can still learn stuff. That's great. Anybody else got any other thoughts about what Jesus did before he went into ministry? Yes? In the synagogue? Yes, he did. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And he obviously knew the scriptures really, really well. Yep, thank you. Yep. Anybody else? What about my tax collector friend? Right. So, my dear tax collector friend told me about this theory earlier this year, and it actually blew my mind that Jesus was a trained rabbi, a highly educated rabbi. And I was like, no, everyone knows that Jesus was an uneducated carpenter. It says so in the Bible, right? But you know what? It doesn't say that in the Bible. It says that his father was a carpenter, and so we make the assumption that Jesus probably was as well, which is fair enough. But there is also evidence to suggest that Jesus was a highly trained rabbi. Rather than learning woodwork, he was spending years in rabbi school, learning the Bible from front to back and back to front. Now, I don't know, but the point is that after 45 years of reading the Bible, I was convinced it said that Jesus was a carpenter. So I wonder, what else am I missing here? Maybe we need to pick up a different translation of the Bible, something a bit out of our comfort zone perhaps. This is the reason I've been using the passage from the Message paraphrase this morning, as well as a bit of my own 2024 Aotearoa New Zealand paraphrase along the way, in the hope that we might pay more attention and have some of our assumptions challenged. Maybe it would help you to listen to someone reading the Bible. I have been enjoying the Dwell app, where you can choose from several different translations and accents, males and females, with or without background music. Just changes it up a bit. The Bible Project app is also helping me to get a fresh perspective on Jesus. And if you want another book recommendation apart from Dallas Willard's, which is very good, I suggest The Jesus I Never Knew by Philip Yancey. I've borrowed this copy from our Ngaire Ave Chapel Library, and it's brilliant. And if you'd like to read it, just come and grab it from me after the service. I wonder, could this be our resolution this Matariki weekend? To strive to take a fresh look at Jesus, his teaching, and his call on our lives. Now, later on in the book of Luke, in chapter 14, Jesus tells a story about another dinner, a great dinner to which many guests were invited. But everyone who was invited had excuses for not attending. They were too busy with their own lives. So the host sent out his slaves instead to gather the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame, and anyone else they could find. These people gratefully responded. I tell you, he said, none of those who were invited will taste my dinner. And one chapter earlier in Luke chapter 13, Jesus alludes to another feast to which people will come from the east and west and north and south. We see this also in the last book of the Bible, in Revelation, where Jesus is portrayed again as a bridegroom at a great wedding feast. Blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb, we are told. And we see people from every tribe and tongue and people and nation worshipping God. So I have been thinking a lot about who is actually going to be invited to this great wedding feast of Jesus. And I'm wondering if I'm going to be a little bit uncomfortable there if he's hanging out with the same kinds of people that he was in Galilee. I'm thinking that there will be people there from Te Taretake Inland Revenue, which is a little bit uncomfortable. But I think there will also be gang members there. And I think there will be conspiracy theorists. And there will be Māori radicals and drug addicts and queer people and trans people and ACT Party members and homeless people and sex workers and refugees and single mums and dole bludgers and every other kind of person you can think of. But, you know, I think it will be the most wonderful party, and I certainly don't want to miss Jesus' invitation to join in. We are all invited, and this is the good news of Jesus. I'm going to close now with a prayer by Richard Foster. Spirit of the living God, be the gardener of my soul. For so long I have been waiting, silent and still, experiencing a winter of the soul. But now, in the strong name of Jesus Christ, I dare to ask, clear away the dead growth of the past. Break up the hard clods of custom and routine. Stir in the rich compost of vision and challenge. Bury deep in my soul the implanted word. Cultivate and water and tend my heart until new life buds and opens and flowers. Amen. Thanks, everyone.